All right, greetings from the Dark Continent, Conscious Caracol here, or Adams Van Sail, here to shine a light on the goings-on here at the southern tip of Africa, but also some other ideas and concepts that I think are relevant, not just to South Africa, but to the wider Western world. And joining me here tonight for a very interesting topic is Benjamin Roberts. He is the associate editor at IM 1776, a publication that I've had the fortunate opportunity and the honor to write for in the past. And he's written some fantastic pieces for this publication as well. I would highly recommend you go check out their work if you have, for some reason, not come across some of the writing that they are and the high quality content that they're publishing there. And particularly today, we're going to be talking about one of his pieces that wasn't written yesterday, was actually written quite a while back, but it's aged very well. And Benjamin, I think that's a nice feather in your cap. Welcome to the show, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much, Ernst. I appreciate it. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. The piece is about 4 years old now, so it's been a very interesting 4 years in the interim.
And I think that actually gives us a lot to talk about, because in the end, for a piece to last and stay relevant, you must have been onto something at that point. I mean, it's so easy to just write about current events and what's going on around you, almost focusing on the waves rather than the currents, or rather than focusing on the waves rather than the tides, or focusing on the wind or the weather rather than the season. And I think something that stood out to me, well, firstly, is the fact that 2021, even though it is just about 4 years ago, was a different world. We were firstly just still smack dab in the middle of COVID. We had just witnessed the 2020 elections and all the turmoil associated with that. But on that note, can you sketch a little bit of that context? Within what context you wrote about this particular topic? I mean, there's so many topics to write about, but it's always what I find interesting is what catches a writer's attention that makes them think this is the moment for this piece. What was happening at that time?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was right in the middle of COVID. I was actually coming out of living in China for about a year. I was there when COVID started, when I started thinking about this piece. And I guess we were a little into the Biden administration at that point. And this intellectual dark web, which is comprised of, Bari Weiss, Joe Rogan, more loosely, Sam Harris, the Weinstein brothers, and a couple other characters, had really gotten a lot of press. I believe they were profiled in the New York Times in like 2018, and it just had kind of kept going. And I saw a lot of people around me, at least, thinking like, "Oh, this is such a great solution." We have to get back to what we were doing before. Basically, was their main criticism of the status quo at the time, and move away from identity politics on the left. And they would always say, "And the right," and we need to not be like Trump, but we need to not be like the craziest wing of our either current or former party. And it always just struck me as just very insufficient as sort of an explanation for what's going on. The model they offered, basically saying we need individualism. We need to return to this sort of almost like mythopoetical civic nationalism that I don't think ever really existed in the way they described in this country. And especially with like the madness of COVID, being locked in our own houses, all of these sort of asinine regulations, I guess I was just disappointed by the lack of sort of zeal or maybe political courage for them to stand up and say the obvious, I feel like, which is that this whole thing was rotten, needed to be replaced. And they had a great opportunity to do that, I felt, and sort of any overtures toward Trump or Trump supporters, but they were always sure to keep that hard line self-enforced on themselves. I think, Jordan Peterson has kind of moved away, but the thing that really struck out to me, I think the one piece in this New York Times profile on them that kind of got me thinking about it seriously was they have very little in common politically. The Weinstein brothers are Bernie Sanders supporters. Like Hoff Sommers is a centrist liberal and Shapiro's an anti-Trump conservative. And I was just like looking at my screen, like that sounds like they have a lot in common politically. They all dislike the main populist force in this country that's actually standing up to the things that they say are these existential threats, but they don't seem to be taking, the relevant action. And so sort of coming out of that COVID time, or being in it rather, and looking at that, just that vagueness and this, we need to get away from identity politics. But that said, not looking at the underlying problems. I mean, I think if you asked them at the time, the answers they gave you were it sprouted up overnight out of nowhere. That's what it felt like. So I just really thought that was sort of intellectually flimsy, and I wanted to take a look at it when I wrote the piece.
And I think something that also stands out is, and you've kind of touched on it now, is in a lot of their analysis of the intellectual dark web, is one of the most used or frequently used or uttered words is freedom. This idea that freedom comes first, and you need to be able or willing to sacrifice everything for your freedoms and for the freedoms of others. And then the opportunity, as you rightly pointed out, came around under COVID, the ultimate opportunity to actually stress test these ideals that you've been talking about or LARPing about. And then it just either was met with silence, or it was actually met with compliance. It was met with, well, this is actually all these tyrannical ideas actually make sense in this moment, because things are uncertain. There's a lot of danger. There's a lot of risk and chaos at the moment. I think this is actually a point of exception. I mean, it's the strangest thing. So I think your piece fit in well in, and we'll be getting into the content in a moment. But I think it fit in well, particularly speaking to something that, I mean, you didn't have to be a top class analyst to realize, but something isn't right here.
Yeah, 100%. And it's really, it's like you're given this perfect opportunity. You wouldn't want these people next to you in a foxhole. I mean, they talk this big game for years. It's like, all right, it's showtime. You have to put something on the line, put skin in the game, and they're nowhere to be found, it seems like. And so, yeah, I think part of that is they don't have any identity really of their own, except that they are all dissatisfied sort of in a boutique way with the various directions and vagaries of the left, but they never really made that transition, a lot of them. Now, maybe some of them have, like Rogan is a great example, although I would say he's on the periphery. And he also doesn't occupy this sort of elite managerial position, where Weinstein was I think, finance manager at Teal Capital and all these things. People who could do something or who's standing up against this would have meant something a lot. And Rogan did, to his credit. But yeah, just push came to shove and they were nowhere to be found. It was very disappointing.
Right. And before we get into the real meat of your piece, there's actually a great quote from it, or an idea rather, that I think condenses a lot of the points that you're going to be making as we delve into this piece. And that is this idea of strength by strength. Strengths do fail, and only a power can overcome another power, only a tribe another tribe. So I mean, what the content of the piece that we're going to be discussing is, it quite intimately. Can you just use these ideas, this idea of strengths by strengths do fail, and only a power can overcome another power, only a tribe another tribe? Can you use that excerpt to kind of lay the foundation for the rest of our discussion in regards to where your piece in the end goes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a quote loosely from Coriolanus, the Shakespeare play, which has the dubious honor of being one of the only Shakespeare plays banned in a Western liberal democracy, quote unquote, because they felt it was too militaristic. I don't know if that was accurate per se, but the entirety of the intellectual dark web really feels like you have two sides fighting, and these sides have both changed a lot. I mean, I think probably most of us can agree that the pre-Trump Republican Party was consistently disappointing, failed to live up to the hopes and expectations of its voters. And the contemporary left in America and elsewhere, had really sort of taken the mask off, so to speak. And so you had this fight already happening. We've locked horns. It's do or die. One of us is going to win. One of us is going to lose. And that's the only way politics can happen. When the IDW sort of sat atop, this tower far away, saying, "Well, hold your shield a little differently," or your sword angle is not right, and it's like, okay, but we are fighting to win control of our political system and change the direction of our culture. And for better or worse, these are the sides, and they're motivated by many different things we could get into. But you have to actually be in the fight. You can't critique your way to power. You can't, write, fluff pieces or make sort of tweaks here and there in order to replace an existing system culturally, politically, or any other place. And so this whole strategy of, well, if we just have enough commentators critiquing the left, they'll get better. And I think that's really what it is best understood as, maybe in the most charitable way, is that they never intended, consciously or unconsciously, to be a general project. It was sort of an intra-left critique. And I think that wasn't really said by most of them, but that's not going to work. Your side is dug in its heels. The trenches have been dug, and there is a fight, and you're not in it, and you don't seem to want to be in it. And so there's sort of a way by which you can never win or lose if you stay above it all, if you stay out of it. But that's not how you can do anything in the real world. And it sort of betrays a sort of status interest or a personal interest over something, actually about fixing your country, saving your country, or pursuing your political ends. You'd rather, sit back and have plaudits, poured upon you. And so I think that's really important to understand, is people lose, people win, groups win and groups lose. And that's how the, wheel of history turns. It doesn't turn any other way.
I mean, there's a fantastic quote from your piece where you argue that the issue that we are seeing is not so much the issue is not too much identity or too much ideology, but too little and of too little quality. And why I wanted to highlight this idea particularly, especially in regards to identity, is he's not a radically subversive thinker, but he's one of the seminal thinkers of the past 50 years is Samuel Huntington, who wrote in the 90s that one of the defining questions in the post-Cold War world is going to be, who are we? And the people who can answer that question are the ones who are going to survive and win. And the people that can't answer that question are the ones who are going to perish. I mean, that cuts to the very core of identity. At the very core of identity is the question, who are you, or who are we? And I really see that in particular, just to quickly touch on what's happening in South African politics, the groups and the organizations and the groupings and communities that are making a difference or that are resilient in a very chaotic and dangerous environment are the ones that can answer that question. Who are we? Who are my people? What am I fighting for? All of those very particular questions that come with knowing or having actually some substance to your sense of identity. Particularly in just here in 2024, in the 2024 election, the parties that did the best or that outperformed everyone's expectations were the ones that were rooted in a very particular identity, and the parties that were spending billions of rands but didn't get anywhere, got like 1% support, were the parties that weren't rooted in any identity but tried to like pander to all of these different just lucky packet of ideas to try and please as many people from a broad church as possible. And I think this is what you touch on there, that the problem is not too much identity, particularly, is exactly a lesson that's being learned in the West in mass, or to rather say to a large extent, particularly the intellectuals that are taking a notice of what's going on. Now, what I wanted to get to as well is specifically, I want to pause on that idea of identity. And you actually quote Marshall McLuhan when he wrote about identity in the sense that weak identities produce violence. Now, before your piece, I was unaware of this idea from McLuhan, and I found it absolutely fascinating. And it's always stuck at the back of my mind. But I mean, once you see it, you really can't unsee it, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. McLuhan is another one of these thinkers like Huntington, who really sort of had a lot of prophetic insight into the modern age or the postmodern age, what have you, that we were coming into. And he uses some great examples that I drawn in the piece, like a frontier environment, the seas, right? Any physical space, any time where your identity is weakened, where you can't be confident in it, where it's uncertain, you have a tendency to lash out or to be more, sort of aggressive in defending what you have left. And violence is a means by which you define yourself and define your identity. And so the weaker your identity gets, you basically get put more and more and more on a war footing. So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg question here. But yes, basically, I would agree with McLuhan that, yeah, weak identities produce violence. And when people are uncertain in their identities, when a country goes from, like America, sort of a 90% heritage European demographic background to now 52, everybody, not just the heritage Americans, are going to be sort of scrambling to redefine themselves. And that produces political conflict and violence. And so the key here is not actually to weaken identity more, because what you're doing is basically an animal's gotten into your house and you're backing it into a corner. It's going to lash out and bite you. The key is to actually give people back their identity, to allow it politically and legally. And the intellectual dark web at the time was doing the opposite, right? It was almost like the left or liberalism had driven, a stake into the heart of American identity, as they've done in many other countries around the world. And they were just sort of gently tapping it in, trying to make it go all the way. And they sort of, they betray themselves a bit, or their own logic, because they're attached to all these ideals that they forget are uniquely, Anglo-American, like the free speech, the constitutionalism, all these things they referenced and lauded come from a specific place and people. And you can't really throw that out and keep all the things you like. And so, yeah, they basically totally misunderstood how identity functions, and in fact encouraged more political conflict and violence. If you deny people the possession of their own, country, and you encourage their dispossession by basically closing their eyes and saying, oh, it's not happening because, I'm an old stock American, it's just bad ideas, it's just not going to work. And people are going to take an issue with it.
And again, I can tie that idea also to an example here in South Africa. The most violent political parties in South Africa, and the ones that incite the most violence, are the ones that are connected to this whole ideology of Pan-Africanism, of like, there should be no borders, there should be no Tanzanians or Kenyans or Botswana or South Africans or whatever, or Zulus or Afrikaners. We all should just be these economic units within a borderless United States of Africa. That's literally their terminology. And in the end, those parties aren't rooted in any real identity. Their identity is this weird abstract idea that they've latched onto. And I think that perfectly demonstrates it as well. And some of the most reasonable parties in South Africa, or let's rather say reasonable organizations, political parties, different types of groupings, are often, not exclusively, but are often very reasonable and open to actually building something constructive, and the ones that are standing on solid ground. Because I think if you're standing on solid identity ground, there's a lot less place for a inferiority complex to take root as well. Exactly. And I mean, I think that's one of the roots of a lot of the malice and cruelty that we see today, especially in many Western countries. It stems from an inferiority complex. So I think, I mean, you hit the nail on the head in regards to seeing that phenomenon play out in your society in America. But I mean, I see it in South Africa as well, which I think those are two very different contexts. And if the theory the concept or idea holds true in both those societies, I think it bolsters it quite a bit.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think this is something that you've noted that's very true. When you take the sense of weak identity and you formalize it into something like Pan-Africanism or any other manner of ideologies, we could just say generally, for the sake of argument, communism or something, that is this boundless, landless, universal ideology, becomes not only very revolutionary and destructive, like you've said, but it also has no end in sight. To actually achieve the political goals of either of these ideologies would be one of the bloodiest things in world history. And it would go on forever, and they would find another justification for this continued expansion, because it'll never be enough. Whereas, like you said, when you're confident and you have knowledge of your identity and you're dealing with somebody either from that group or from a different group, you're working in sort of mutually understood terms. But this transcendent idea, I mean, and that's what happens when you have a weak identity. You're looking for something bigger than yourself, but people tend to skip that middle step of looking around them, saying, okay, who am I? Where am I? and they go all the way to this, revolutionary, transcendent set of ideas, and it typically turns out very poorly, as you noted.
Yeah, and in South Africa as well, my own personal experience working for AfriForum, an organization that's very firmly rooted in Afrikaner cultural identity. One of the other cultural groupings or organizations that we actually, or cultural organizations that we get along very well with, and actually had a joint event very recently, is the Zulu monarchy. Because again, the Zulu monarchy are very, very staunch traditionalists, very deeply rooted in their culture and heritage. And that actually gives a lot of common ground for discussion when it comes to Afrikaner organization that's very deeply and firmly rooted in our identity, without an inferiority complex, with a healthy sense of self-respect. When that encounters another group with a healthy sense of self-respect, also with a solid footing, as I said, this is not a rock solid theory. It's not exclusive, but it does tend to facilitate good relations, or at least give the opportunity for it. And I've seen it in practice in South Africa as well. And what I also wanted to quickly get a little bit more context on, particularly for my audience, is this this Shakespearean play that you use? Because I mean, we've set the table, we've laid the foundation for our conversation, but this the play of Coriolanus actually it forms the backbone of your entire piece. Could you don't have to recite the play from start to finish, but can you give the cliff notes, or like the little elevator pitch of what are the key beats of this play and why it is so relevant to this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll put it hopefully as succinctly as possible. Coriolanus, is a Roman commander, and generally returns to Rome in triumph. And, the peasantry basically come and say, like, give us money, give us food. And he says, well, you should have been with me fighting, and you would have it. And you stayed behind while, like, we all went and died. So, no, you can't. And so the people just, like, hate him. Like, the masses of Rome, like, really don't like this guy. And events transpire. Basically, there's a lot of political conflict. And he ends up leaving Rome because he's rejected by the commanding class or whatever. And he returns with this other group called the Volscians to conquer Rome, actually, because he's, I've been kicked out of where I'm from. Now I need to go find another group who belong to them, because as it stands now, I'm a man alone. I'm in exile. And his mother convinces him not to march on Rome and to stop at the last minute. And after this, he's promptly killed by the Volscians, the group that he had joined to conquer Rome with. And so there's a lot of wonderful
of glory and victory.
Yeah. And so I think it's just a very poignant, to sort of condense it, example of the realities of the world. I mean, of course, there's a lot more to it, but you can see that this strategy didn't work. He sort of almost had this moment where he's like, okay, well, I'll reject this group I joined. I got kicked out of the group I was in, and then he's murdered. And so there's nothing outside of the raw, hard reality of group politics and conflict and life. And so I was reading that play sort of as I was thinking of this, of the IDW. It just really stuck out to me as, an example of, rights by rights do falter, strengths by strengths do fail. Just a sort of perfect distillation of what they're missing about human life and political life. And I think also, just to touch on this, is, I think many of them are sort of intellectually consistent, but I was just brushing up Sam Harris before, going back to a revolutionary idea. He said some propositions are so dangerous that it may even be ethical to kill people for believing them. And so at the same time that there's this sort of preaching about, well, we need to lower the temperature, we need to go away from our identities, so on, they're really clinging to an identity of their own still in a sort of counterfeit way, which is maybe being elite human capital, or, being rational, not believing themselves to be part of a group. But again, you see that viciousness when it comes to ideas then is, okay, this person's thoughts are so bad, we might have to just kill them. And it's like, okay, well, we've moved on to something else entirely. So not to sidetrack us, but.
Right. And that play, or that the themes in that play also remind me of a quote from a Afrikaner poet who said, and I'll translate it in my head to the best of my ability. So he said, it's "See ye Langenhoven," and he said that tear yourself away from your own nation and marvel at how the other nations do not fall over themselves to take you in.
Yeah, that's great. That's perfect.
That's pretty much what you're describing there. And I mean, now, it's for someone that's read the piece, the connection is obvious. But can you make that connection now to how this particularly is relevant, this play and the themes within it, to the IDW now looking retrospectively at them? What is their Rome that they are seeking to conquer, but then couldn't at the last moment?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I think for them, their Rome was something like, maybe the public square, being able to say these slightly dissenting ideas or stand up for what they saw as a sort of more perfect form of liberalism that had come before. And what you could say maybe they really wanted above all was, let's say, free speech, right? In their stated beliefs. But you can't really speak your way solely out of censorship or a censorship regime. You can't just debate while somebody's passing laws and winning elections to censor you, right? And so I would say their goal was sort of opening up this public square again, not in this universal sense, really probably just for them and their sort of set of polite society ideas that had become recently unfashionable among the left at the time. And they failed to conquer it, I think, as I was noting earlier, because here comes Trump, who in our situation it is the best hope for sort of restoring free speech in America, as well as a South African Elon Musk, buying X and so on. And they refuse to support this man. And some of them have later still, so like Sam Harris has just dug in his heels, right? He hates Elon Musk, hates all these other people, quite a reversal.
He would vote for Joe Biden even if they found dead children in his basement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm glad you remember that. I forgot he said that. It's crazy. But
it feels like a dream. It feels like one of those naps where you fall asleep without your alarm going off, and like 3 hours late you just had the strangest dream.
Yeah, it's ludicrous. And so what they kind of forgot here is you have to fight for these freedoms and for this free speech you want. You have to win elections. You have to dismantle bureaucracies. You can't just go on podcasts and speak nicely and sort of offer these criticisms. You have to actually get in the arena. You have to go toe-to-toe with these people. They're going to smear everyone who does it. They're going to try and ruin your life. And they weren't up for that. And the person who was up for that, they counter-signaled and sort of harangued almost the entire way. And the spoils of this are what they say they want, but you can't get it unless you embrace some of the ugly and like gritty realities of political life and some of the people that you see as low status, which I think was a major issue here also. The Trumpian ethnogenesis to them was not only maybe bad in principle for them, but also occurring among the wrong people. These low status, maybe downwardly mobile groups in America, and they didn't want to be associated. And so I think a lot of it also came back to this. It's almost like court politics. All these people are playing status games because they're in a different environment. And so their stated goals, it's clear to see who best supports them, but they refuse to do it. They turn back at the last moment as well.
Right. And I think something else, one of the phrases that really resonated within the heyday of the IDW was the battle of ideas. And I always use when I think back of the battle of ideas, it really comes down to what you see the battle of ideas as. Is the battle of ideas the means or the ends? If it's the means, then that's fine, because then you're trying to refine your ideas to a point where you can actually influence reality. I think that's a healthy way of approaching it. But
absolutely,
a lot of people seem to have viewed and still view the battle of ideas as the ends. It's like this idea gladiatorial combat where you put like one idea on this side of the ring and the other side of the ring has another idea, and then you fight and the crowd cheers and then in the end, nothing is really resolved. No real world impact has happened. All the people that came to watch the fight go home, and nothing changes. And then next week they're back to see a new idea fight another idea. Doesn't matter how ridiculous. It almost, I think, in a very perverse way, one of the best examples of it is the internet blood sports era, where online debate was one of the things to be watching.
Absolutely.
And it was just like, tonight this person goes up against this person. Doesn't matter who wins, doesn't matter what conclusions or dialectic happens. We just want to see almost like bloodshed, metaphorical ideas bloodshed, and people get pummeled or memes be created. But I really think that's been that idea that all we need is the battle of ideas and everything will sort itself out, and that adage of all we need is good ideas to dispel the bad ideas, that hasn't worked. And particularly, I mean, one of the IDW persons, Ben Shapiro, has one of, I think, his most famous quote: "Facts don't care about your feelings." That's proven to not be true. Sometimes feelings just beat the ever loving crap out of the facts. My favorite meme, I don't have it now to put it on screen, but one of my favorite memes that really illustrates that perfectly. I don't know what the context is of the image, but it's an image of like these giants that are going up against this Roman legion, and they're just ripping these little Roman legions apart. And the Roman legions, their label is the facts, and the giants' facts are like emotion, intuition, gut feeling, and like logs through these little Romans. And I'm like, that's really what happens in the arena. Sometimes the facts can be absolutely flawless and like bulletproof, and then all it takes is like the emotional giant to come and like just whack one of these facts with a speed bump. And then
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you've seen that a lot with, like I said, there's sort of an ethnogenesis, says Trump. I mean, you can give me as many facts and figures you want, and you can give a lot of people in this country who are, mostly downwardly mobile white people and middle-class white people and so on and so forth, even though Trump has seen stunning shifts among other groups, which we can touch on later. But, you can tell them free trade is great. Look at all these graphs, look at these statistics, but they don't want it. You can tell them, oh, immigration overall in the grand scheme of things increases the GDP and you're paying 2 cents less on this and that. And, but they don't want that. They want their country.
Look at this graph go up.
Yeah, exactly. They don't want their country back, and that's an instinctual emotional thing, and you have to beat that out of somebody. Basically, you're never going to argue your way out of that. And the same goes for the sort of element on the left of, you can tell these people as much as you want, oh well, let's just speak nicely and respect each other, but they hate the other side, right? They hate you because you are you. And there's not really much you can argue out of that, except for like an extreme outlier case. And so, it's almost like they think that human nature was totally changed by like the advent of, I don't know, the written debates and YouTube, and XYZ owns ABC, and if you do that enough times, you win.
No, you just have to destroy enough college students in debate, and then that'll save Western civilization.
Yeah, and but they miss the whole point. Is like writing, speaking, debating, any of these things. The whole point is to translate your ideas into and emerge at some political reality. To convince enough people. Mostly you're speaking to your own group when you're speaking, people who can actually be won over. You're never going to win over your absolute political enemy who has diametric views from you and identities from you. But that translation point, I mean, you have to question, like you said, whether or not it's just sort of doing it to do it, or whether they're maybe afraid to take the next step and contest, support the contesting of elections, or build things, build communities, build parallel infrastructure, whatever it is. But it's almost like, you're debating inside this increasingly shrinking bubble of like legally allowed speech or non-penalized speech. And you're just going to sit there while the walls sort of close in on you. And then, okay, no more debating for you, or at least it'll be heavily circumscribed. So like you said, it was a blood sport. And I'm glad to see that I think I mean, it's still around. You still see it, but I think a fair amount of people are now not taking it as seriously. I mean, like you said, it's in this sort of infotainment jargon, and I think at least a fair amount of people have realized, oh, I have to actually go do something. I have to like build something.
I have to start
Yeah,
something. Yeah,
exactly right. And you can't play on your enemy's terms and speak on their platforms and expect it to work forever.
Right. And I think another critical point some people might misunderstand, this is not an argument for anti-intellectualism. This is an argument that you should think and do, but you should think before you do. So it is important to have these debates and discussions and really challenge ideas. But then you have to, in the end, it has to be a means to an end. The debate can't be the ends. The battle of ideas can't be the end. And you actually, there's a quote from your piece that deals with the nature of facts, which I also think is very relevant, particularly still on this topic of facts don't care about your feelings. Your quote goes, "Facts are, as with anything else, the subject of interpretation and will be reformulated or discarded depending on the interpreter." Now, before you elaborate a bit on that, I immediately think about the constitution in South Africa as well. When my colleague Adams Roots always makes the point that when people say South Africa has the best constitution in the world, then he says, well, the power doesn't lie. The constitution can say what it wants and can stand on its head while it's doing it. But in the end, the power is not vested in the document. The power is vested in whoever is interpreting the constitution at any particular time. So it's that judge interpreting the Constitution or that politician interpreting the Constitution and then using that interpretation to actually influence reality. That's where power comes in. So just your use of interpretation there, or the central point of the interpreter when it comes to facts, just immediately made my mind go there as well. But can you elaborate a bit more on that idea of the nature of facts, as you put it here?
Yeah, absolutely. Ernst is exactly right to say that. I think it works on sort of two levels. And I think I talk a little bit about Baudrillard, I'll say in the very American way. There, he has a quote where, any given bombing in Italy is the work of the far right or the far left or the establishment trying to shore up its power with a false flag and so on and so forth. Yeah, there we go. I love that.
Yeah, you can continue. I just wanted to put that up for reference. Maybe
no,
I
it's
didn't
great.
describe it well enough.
It explains it better than I ever could, honestly. But on an elite level, you're exactly right. I mean, I think you see this a lot, particularly maybe with some well-intentioned older people in the United States who say, well, they can't do that. That's illegal. You're not allowed to do that. And it's, well, they can and they are, because a piece of paper is not going to stop somebody with power and the ability to enforce it. And so on that level, facts are malleable and change according to who's in power, according to who has the sort of means of legitimizing a narrative or a story to seem respected or authoritative. And that can be used in sort of whatever way they wish, whether that's either in constitutional law or with the media broadcasting a certain narrative and sort of setting that up as fact. And then on another level, I think this is something you saw with the IDW too, is appealing to this, like, okay, let's all get the facts, the objective facts, and then we'll discuss them and figure it out. But just completely ignores, like you said, it's all up to interpretation. If a stabbing happens or if a crime occurs, or you can think of any manner of story, two different people will think two completely different things about the perpetrator, the victim, what should be done. Whose fault it was, what were the mitigating factors. And so anything you give to somebody, they're going to interpret it based on their identity group. They're going to say, I don't know, I don't buy that instinctually, or buy into it instinctually. And you can't, you can coerce people into believing things, but from the IDW, you can't argue people out of their instinctual reaction to and acceptance or rejection of certain facts. So both on the elite sort of powerful level, these things are malleable and can be used to serve the needs and wishes of whoever or whatever group is in power. Sorry. And on the popular level, you will not, for a very long time, see people agreeing on one narrative and debating it, from there, people are going to formulate whatever happens based on their own life, their own experiences, their own identity, their own instinctual, feelings about who's involved, who's telling them this. And it's a fool's errand, basically, to say, like, where did facts go? We lost facts. I'm not sure that they were ever, around in any meaningful way, except at a time when societies are extraordinarily high trust and very homogenous. But at any other time in history that there's conflict, it's not like the Romans and the Goths came together and were like, okay, well, here are the facts. Right. So let's figure things out from there. Right? Right. You just, you use what you can to win.
I mean, the most simple metaphor would be the game of chess, where it is impossible to play chess with someone if you don't agree on the rules or how the pieces move. And I mean, I see it so many times, especially in South Africa, where a lot of these classical liberals will go into interviews and they will cite all the facts, or they'll cite some like concrete data. And then the other person on the panel, like some Afro-nat, some African nationalist, will be like, is the author white? And they're like, yes. And you're like, well, fact disregarded. And they're like, but that's not how it works. And they're like, oh, well, that's how it works. Yeah, and it's literally that idea of the person playing chess, and then the opponent just teleports the queen to the other side of the board. And they're like, you can't do that. And he's like, why? I just did. Yeah. What are you going to do about it? Like,
exactly.
Yeah, and every time it just plays out, and it demonstrates that point where, yes, facts can actually be very persuasive if everyone agrees, has that shared moral universe, has that shared almost cultural reference system that you can use. And you actually point to it in your piece. There's a quote here that I highlighted where you say, or where you write, to rely on them, the facts as the basis for discourse, you must share the same interpretations of underlying reality, and for this you must exist in a shared moral universe, and for this you must belong to the same tribe. Power is exercised by collectives, and the shade of knowledge produced depends on the tribe's particularities. End quote.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I think that it holds up pretty much correctly. And I think what you see among these people who are so driven to get people to agree on their set of rules, right, and sort of keep trying. I mean, you'll see them be ignored and rebuffed again and again and again, and they just can't seem to shake this idea that, if we can just nail down the facts, people will see my way of thinking. I think I talk about close to that Carl Jung and the Vater complex, this like absence of patriarchal authority in society leading to some of these outcomes. And I think actually J.D. Vance said this, the American vice president-elect, in his recent interviews, that there's a desire to reimpose a high trust society from the top, and to sort of say, like, no, this is the agreed narrative. You have to believe it. It's the facts, so on and so forth. And kind of brushing aside all of the things that made that possible, which was homogeneity, a shared history, a shared culture, a shared people with a common either, destiny or vision or way of thinking, way of doing things. And that doesn't exist really anymore in our country. It's gone away, and I think in South Africa, many other places. And so when they encounter this absence of fact-making authority, that like fatherly, patriarchal sort of ability or component of a society, rather than accept that for what it is and work with their reality, they want to reimpose it. So basically, instead of building a high trust society from the bottom up, they want to skip all the steps and place it top down, and not even realizing that engenders even less trust in what somebody is telling you, right? And so I think that's a kind of interesting dynamic here, is ignoring the fact that the high trust society was because most of the people in this country and other countries belong to one group, overarching. Of course, there's particularities underneath it, but a common nation, a common people who could agree on basically a way of doing things. And now that's gone, and they'd like to have that authority back, that consensus making ability back, but they don't want any of the other parts that made it possible back. Right. And I think that's one of the sort of fundamentally misguided things about the IDW, or maybe contemporary classical liberals, whatever you want to call them, is missing the forest for the trees, basically.
Mm. And that trying to reimpose top-down high trust society or consensus, I mean, I just think immediately of like that what you're saying is these facts are going to be so factual that they are going to be mandatory, or believing them is going to be mandatory.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that it just contradicts itself, and it's not going to work. But I mean, at the end of the day, that's what some people are suggesting. And I also, the other image that comes to my mind is this: it's not a profound new idea. It's actually a metaphor that's often used. It's the cinema that's filled with people, and they what one half of the cinema is not watching the same film. And they're watching the same movie, but when they walk out, they didn't actually watch, or they didn't interpret or see the same movie that was playing on the screen. And I think we see this in particular in America, when you see the divide between Democrats and Republicans on core issues, not just like little periphery issues, like should we raise the taxes by 5% or by 20%, like actual questions of like, what is an American, or like what do we want, in what is the future we are building towards, what is the ideal future look like? Those types of questions are so divided to the point where it is that metaphor of the people sitting in the same cinema but watching two different films at the same time.
Yeah, so it's an epistemological sort of, I don't know that I would say crisis, but just complete and total divide, right? You can't agree on the nature of even reality, like sort of the meta-narrative heart of our society about baseline values, religious questions, whether, of course, this is cliche now, but, what is a man? What is a woman? You can't agree on the reality of gender, on what abortion is, on what an American is, on what a country is, right? For some people, a country now is
an economic zone.
An economic zone, and anybody can come and go, and the second you step foot on it, you're just as American as anybody else. And you should be afforded all the rights and privileges that are in. And so you can't even agree on the place you're living, what it is. There's no real hope of bridging that divide through something like debate or whatever. You just have to realize, I'm so far away from this other group. Our interpretations, our realities are so different that, simply put, one of us is going to win and live under their conditions and terms, and one of us is going to lose. And it's a difficult thing to swallow, I think, for people who maybe have like a memory of a higher trust society, of a more homogenous America that has slipped away, as it has in many countries. But it's the reality that we live in, and it doesn't seem to be going away. I mean, even when you have an extraordinarily popular mandate for Trump, for example, and reversing course on these things and slowing the dispossession of heritage Americans and so on, you see it actually like a doubling down by most people on these things. Even if they know they're unpopular with most of the country, the groups that are attached to these issues, like transgenderism or mass migration, it's part of their way of living, of seeing the world, of interacting with those around them. And hopefully it will continue to become less politically advantageous and expedient. But even if it does, it's going to be nearly impossible for them to let go of. It is their, religion, their way of life, their culture, their people's outlook on the world. And that's not something you can just sweep aside when you lose a few elections.
And taking into account a lot of what we've discussed here already, and now looking in the rearview mirror 4 years ago, I mean, I'm pretty convinced that your piece has aged pretty well. But you personally, as the author, looking back, do you think that there's some things you, not now in a new piece, but some things that you would have added, things that have happened since that you would never have even imagined that actually either bolstered or weakened your arguments? Like, what I'm asking is basically, is there any type of almost like an addendum since then that you would have wanted to add, taking into account all the just insane things that have happened, developments that have happened since then?
Right. 100%. I think one of the things I was pleasantly surprised by, and I know I'm putting a lot of this in election terms, but it's very recent, so I think it's helpful.
I think it's a good lens to make the point through.
Okay, excellent. By the shift, the rightward shift of, the American sort of minority groups, like Latinos, like even among Black men. Now, of course, it's split by gender, But that was something that I think you could look at and say, okay, there does seem to be a resurgence, broadly speaking, and of course not in like the fever dreams of the sort of boomer class who think that we'll all get along forever and everything like that, of this civic nationalism. And it seems like it's appealing to people, but not in the way it was imagined. I mean, Trump got there basically through explicitly, nativist, populist, whatever you want to call it, appeals. And it seems like American minority groups, at least a large amount of newcomers, actually liked that and agreed with it and sort of were able to see themselves as part of that, which is interesting, right? It defies the traditional logic of, the sort of former conservative movement, which is like, we need amnesty to appeal to these people. And in fact, you actually just need to say, we need Confederate statues to stay up and everybody's got to go. And people can get on board with that to some extent. And so I think that's something surprising in the group dynamics of the United States, where actually you are seeing a sort of people joining up with us. Although at the same time, I would say, that's about two strong identities coming together. You can work together because you understand one another, how you're similar, how you're different, where your goals align, and where they diverge.
Doesn't mean you become one entity. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think that maybe in some senses it does a bit of both. It's surprising, maybe bolsters some way. Still something I'm sort of working out in my head, but certain things have, I think, been proven true, like with the inefficacy of the strategy. Like Eric Weinstein, I think you maybe saw him on Twitter. I feel like I'm picking on him a lot, but he's like, well, I haven't been contacted by the administration's transition team. It's like, well, why would you? You didn't support him. You didn't do anything. And so I think to a large degree, these people are being sort of just relegated to the what was in vogue of a few years ago, that now, in the face of, again, the election, of political reality, of the ability to institute actual change through the mechanisms of law, just sort of to this dustbin, right? So I think that has been proven true. I mean, a lot of these people have become just, not nearly as popular, not relevant. I don't know who Sam Harris's audience is, but he definitely doesn't have the same popular or mainstream appeal. The Weinsteins are not going to be near government, although I don't know if any of us expected that. And I think, the most popular of these people, Joe Rogan, who was, never as dyed in the wool, I think, part of their movement, is more relevant than ever. But he also took a side. He also understood the political realities of his situation, and acted on it. And so I think that logic, at least, has been borne out by their respective successes or failures as a movement and as sort of individuals and power brokers.
But I think when you look at the support base of Donald Trump in the 2024 election, the best word to describe it would be an alliance. It's definitely not a homogenous group. It is an alliance of many different factions and groupings and people from all types of angles coming at the issue.
100%. And I think also the willingness and the sort of ability to make that coalition, to make that alliance, is another example of having strong identities that you're confident in, where you can say, we share this, we have to beat them, we're not the same, we'll probably never be the same, but as it stands now, we can have a greater enemy and work against it. And again, it goes back to that sort of just, this is the reality. And these people are voting with their instincts, with their guts, with what is threatening them, with who is willing to ally with them and who is not. And so, yes, I think it's an alliance, and it's encouraging for now.
Yeah. And before we get to final thoughts, I just wanted to give some attention to about 3 comments here from the chat that I highlighted. Sideline Opinion said earlier in the stream that children with weak identities and self-image tend to join gangs to get some type of identity. Well, that's absolutely true. The grasping at identity never goes away. I mean, there are different levels of how strong or firm your identity is, or how solid your footing is in your identity. But the grasping at wanting an identity is almost, you can't separate it from the human experience. So I think that's where a lot of people end up. Definitely sideline opinions. And then Triple P or Tetra says, anyone see the new Urania video recently? Absolutely heartwarming. If you haven't, yes, I did. So every year, just for context, those who don't know, Urania, the Afrikaner town here in South Africa, every year they have like a festival where everyone in the town comes together, and your family has to bring some type of dish or something that you've made, and then everyone shares in the bounty of the town and everything that's created. Beautiful. Everyone dresses nice and in their beautiful clothing and in cultural clothing, and then they have a nice collective experience in their identity as Afrikaners and as Iranians. So the themes within that festival also perfectly match with what we're discussing here today. It is the latest video.
No gangs there, I would imagine. I said I imagine there's no gangs in Urania.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a beautiful thing. You should go check it out. It's the latest video on the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is called Urania Beweging, but I think if you just type in Urania and go to the channels filter, you'll find it. And then the last question here that I wanted to highlight was Gilgamesh von Urek, who says, I never watched the play, but I read about Coriolanus in a history book. In that version, there were many leaders who were jealous of his success. All right. Thank you very much for those comments as well. I just wanted to highlight them there. Benjamin, as we head now into the wrapping up of our conversation here, what are some of your final thoughts when you look forward now? I mean, we've focused a lot in the rearview mirror. A lot of our chat was retrospective. I'm not expecting you to make predictions or what's going to come next, but I think let's put it this way: what do you think are the things that are going to be important in the years ahead that should be focused on if you're in any way serious about producing real results and not just getting trapped in pretty much what the world that the IDW got trapped in the past 4 years? If you don't want to end up like them, rather, what should you be doing? What should you be focusing on?
I think on an individual level, you have to, get involved either in local political groups or cultural groups, all of these really strong bonds that enable concrete action to be taken are made in person, interpersonally. You form small groups of people and are able to work from there. And so I would say, now is the time to get involved in your community. I mean, I know that's a bit broad, but we've seen really the effect that can have, maybe, for example, with the gender hysteria, parents taking over their PTAs via elections, parent-teacher associations. And so really taking an eye to where you live, where you are, and beginning to make inroads there with like-minded people and friends. I think also in the future, I think we've really seen maybe not a final repudiation, but maybe a first or a powerful acknowledgement of the reality of politics, right? The intervention of Elon Musk into politics directly, realizing what's at stake for him personally, for his country, countries. Hopefully good things come out of this election for South Africa as well. But really realizing, now's the time to we have a great window in America, at least, to take concrete action to claw back the state that has been extraordinarily negative for us for a very long time. And I think you'll see more and more people, hopefully across the Western world and in America, acknowledge that the time for talking, the time for, trying to compromise with your enemy here and meeting them halfway is essentially over. And you don't, in fact, have to. You can win, and you're more likely to win when you get in the arena, acknowledge the current rules of the game, and you don't have to, go on a million YouTube debates with them to win. You can just act and win. And so I think that move toward concrete action is going to continue happening. I think it's been a lot of shining examples, and people should, as soon as possible, just start to really put down roots where they are and make their immediate environment better, get involved politically, and that a lot of fruit will be born from that.
Wow. I mean, that's what I encourage my audience as well, is that start somewhere. I mean, the best way to describe it, I think, in regards to online activism versus real world activism is the same way in which dream time functions versus real world time. You can have a dream where you live an entire lifetime, and then when you wake up, it was 5 minutes that you fell asleep at your desk. And I mean, that's how I almost feel online activism and online change often manifests, is the fact that you might pour in like a lifetime's worth of work into your online activism, and then the real world effect is like 5 minutes worth of activism of building something real. And I think that's a very good place to find inspiration in, is the fact that if you want to really see yourself make a difference, doesn't mean you should be logging off everywhere and not using the online resources and platforms at your disposal. But at the same time, you should be doing something real. You should be joining a collective, supporting the people that you see doing real world things, the people starting publications, the people building institutions, the people actually doing something in the real world. You should be seeking them out and supporting them. And on that note, Benjamin, you are actually involved with a publication that is trying to not just expose people to new ideas and to radical or subversive ideas, but rather also it is trying to have a real world effect through influencing the thoughts of the people that do, the people that are out there in the arena, giving them something to think about. And that would be my last question then, is to where can people find your work, and tell them also, if they know nothing about IM 1776, give them a little bit of a pitch there why it's worth their time.
Absolutely. So IM 1776 is a premier publication of sort of dissident perspectives from a wide array of authors. We've done a lot of interviews. RFK Jr. is a great example, sort of connecting to people who have influence, getting into their minds, seeing how they think. We write about geopolitics, culture, I mean, basically everything you can find from a broadly dissident perspective. You can find us at im1776.com or Twitter at im1776. You can find me on Twitter, yet again, or X, I should say, at Radical Benjamin. And one of the things IM has begun doing in the past maybe year and a half is having in-person events, which we found have been a great tool to connect like-minded people who are building things, bring them together, build a stronger network that can have more of an impact in the real world. And so we're going to continue to do that. Check out our website to see when the next one is going to be, and please subscribe and support us.
I've had the privilege of being able to attend one of those in-person events. It was a fantastic opportunity and really enriching opportunity. Really appreciate it. And also had the pleasure of meeting you in person and being able to chat with you in person there in New York City earlier this year. It was also a fantastic way of actually getting to know someone, not just over online or reading their content, but actually being able to talk to them in person is just an unbeatable experience. But Benjamin, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for keep up the good work there at IM 1776 and also through your writing, keeping a keen eye there on what you guys are publishing there, and all the best for the future.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on. It's been wonderful.
Fantastic. And also, as I told you off air, beautiful background there, not a fake green screen or anything.
There we go.
Beautiful America there in the background. And then lastly, just thank you to everyone that tuned in. I see some very, very kind comments here. Sideline Opinion says, thank you, Benjamin and Aaron, for illustrating to us that we do not all have to become progressive. Maybe the answer we are searching for is behind us and not ahead of us. Well, it's always good to look in the rearview mirror from time to time, to learn from the mistakes of others, because you don't want to have to go through all those mistakes yourself. And thank you for everyone that tuned in. Thank you for your questions and your comments. Really appreciate that. And if you're new to this channel and you like these types of conversations, you can subscribe. And if you're watching and it's no longer live, you can still take part in the conversation by leaving a comment there in the comment section. I read all of them. I really appreciate your feedback there. You can ask a question, anything there, and I will be checking the comment section out as well. But Benjamin, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your year. And as I said, once again, all the best to your publication and to you and your colleagues. I hope you have nothing but just great success in 2025.
Thank you. I wish all the same for you. Hope to see you again soon.
Fantastic. All right. Cheers, guys. Have a good one, and God bless.